Good morning, lovelies. Today we are going to be talking about magic. More specifically, how to write it. Before we get started, remember to click that subscribe button and ring the bell so you do not miss another video. I am now dedicated to a weekly schedule, so you'll get new videos on Sundays. You can also find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. All the links in the description. My birthday giveaway is still going strong. 5 subscribers will receive a copy of my illustrated sci-fi novella Homestead Hunts. Winners will be announced on this channel at the start of September, so click that subscribe button for a chance to win. This video is more of a writing 101, a good place to get started if you want to write a fantasy novel but are still struggling with the fantasy aspect of it. But each of the topics we'll discuss honestly each deserve their own video, which I'll make if there's a demand for it. I'm going to recommend looking into the YouTubers Hello Future Me, Jenna Moresi, and Overly Sarcastic Productions. I use them when I'm trying to come up with ideas for how to world build. They all cover similar topics in more detail. They're all amazing. Note that the process of writing is different for everyone. These are the questions that I ask myself and the process that I go through when I am writing magic into my story. Hopefully, this will prove helpful for you too. Let's start by defining our terms. What is magic? Screw it. I'm just going to assume that everyone knows what magic is, especially as it pertains to the fantasy genre. We'll move on to the good stuff. One of the best ways to figure out what your magic will look like in your world is figure out its role in the story. Why are you writing magic in the first place? What is its impact on the plot? This will help determine A, how much energy you need to put into creating your magic system, B, what it can do, and C, what it cannot do. If magic takes up only a small part of the story, a single prophecy or curse, for instance, then you don't really need to put a whole effort into defining it. If you know that magic is going to be a big part of the story, but you cannot let it defeat your evil overlord until after the main character gets a magic sword midway through, you know that your magic is probably artifact-based and requires certain materials or rituals to work. Figure out the limits of your magic so that way your readers don't go, well, why didn't they just use that magical ability in the beginning to defeat the villain? Which means we need to talk about magic systems. A magic system is how magic appears in your world. Its rules, its abilities, its limitations. They exist on a sliding scale between hard and soft. Hard magic systems have very clear rules, limitations, weaknesses, and costs. It is clearly explained in the narrative what it can and cannot do. The best example that I know of is Fullmetal Alchemist. Magic runs off of the law of equivalent exchange. If you want to create something, you have to sacrifice something of equal material and value. If you screw up or try to break these rules, you will literally lose a limb. Soft magic systems are on the exact opposite end of the spectrum. Magic exists, but it's not clearly defined and it's unpredictable. Think Lord of the Rings. What exactly are Gandalf's powers? No one really knows. This lends an air of mystery and wonder to the story. Each system has its own benefits and drawbacks. Hard magic systems are great for making things more difficult for your protagonist, and that's always a good thing. The more obstacles you can throw at them, the better. If your characters need to do something, they can't necessarily just use magic, and if they do, they have to be careful and creative with it. The downside is that hard magic systems are, by definition, more predictable. You can't really surprise your readers with your magic in this type of story. Hard magic systems are like math. 2 plus 2 will always equal 4 unless you specifically add or subtract a certain element. If you establish a hard magic system, you have to stick with it or foreshadow some sort of loophole to use later. Soft magic systems don't have that problem. They're never fully explained, so you can kind of do whatever you want with them. And this includes things like leveling up with the power of friendship or power of love. You can really weave your magic into your story and your theme. Or if your main character is non-magical, magic can just exist, either for flavor or to cause chaos and problems for your characters. 2 plus 2 might equal 4 or 10 or fish whenever they do a spell or summon a person or a deity or whatever. Roll those dice to find out. The downside is that sometimes the victory in the end can feel cheap or cheesy if it's just a wizard did it. Obviously, you can blend the two. Most stories don't go to the extreme end of the spectrum, they fall somewhere in the middle. Even Fullmetal Alchemist, which has one of the strictest magic systems in fantasy, has the Philosopher's Stone, which allows the characters to break the rules of their world for a price. Avatar: The Last Airbender, for instance, technically uses two different magic systems. Elemental bending is very strict. Unless you're the Avatar, benders only get one of the four elements to bend. They get a little bit of wiggle room with what those elements can do, like some waterbenders can heal, some firebenders can create or redirect lightning, but that's it. A firebender like Zuko is never going to suddenly start waterbending. The rules of bending are strict and eternal. The rules of the spirit world, on the other hand, are very different. It almost feels like they made them up as they went along. Spirits can be and do almost anything, and this works because the rules of the spirit world aren't explained in the way that bending is. Game of Thrones is another example of blending hard and soft magic systems. The priests of R'hllor, the god of light, use a very different type of magic than Brandon Stark and the Greenseers. They each follow different rules. When it comes to your story and determining how hard your magic system is going to be, here are some questions to ask yourself. What is something magic can do in your world? What is something magic cannot do in your world? Is there a cost? Do you have to sacrifice to a particular deity? Do you need specific tools or materials? Do you need to recite a spell or use hand and body gestures? Is there a physical or mental toll when it's done? And what happens when you don't have access to these materials or if you use them incorrectly? Does it just nothing happen? Do you lose a limb? Do you lose your life? What goes on? This will give you a baseline to help figure out the rest of your magic system. Just be careful to stay consistent with the rules that you do set out. No reader likes to be told magic can only be done if you do X, Y, and Z, only to have a character flinging never before seen fireball at the bad guy with no explanation other than plot, or it's the main character and they're special. That's called a Deus Ex Machina, and it's bad writing. Soft magic systems in particular run the risk of falling into this trap as they don't tend to have as many costs and limitations as hard magic systems. You have to remember that one of the most important elements of writing, any kind of writing, it's not magic or world building, but stakes. You need to convince your audience that something valuable is being threatened, with a real risk of being destroyed. You can't do that if your characters are pulling new godlike powers out of their asses because you said so. If you're kind of like me and you prefer to build your world before you write your story, then start from the beginning. What is the source of magic in your world? Where does it come from? It usually comes from four potential sources. Number one, some people are just born with it. This is one of the most common ways that magic appears in modern media. Maybe it's genetic, maybe it's just random. I recently read a fantasy series where people got magical powers because of experimentation. Number two, the land itself. Maybe there are magical mines or storms where people can harness it. In which case, what impact does this have on the environment? Number three, chosen ones. Some person, deity, god, whatever, has chosen this person to be able to fart a ray of frost. Here, magic is a gift from external deities, so think paladins and clerics from Dungeons and Dragons. Sometimes magic can be taken away if the paladin or cleric in question break alignment or do something that is so antithetical to what their deity stands for. Bye-bye magic powers. This type of magic is determined by who is doing the gifting. So, for example, in the Poppy War, there's several different gods. One of them is the Phoenix god. He can literally burn entire armies alive, activate volcanoes. He is this incredibly powerful, cruel fire god. So don't ask him to help with your gardening. Number four, artifacts. Some sort of physical object can either do a magical thing or let whoever's wielding them do a magical thing. In which case, how are these artifacts created? Where are they found? How common are they? Often you can combine these different sources. The Percy Jackson series, one of my favorite series of all time, features demigods who are born with their powers, but those powers come from and are determined by their godly parents. And these demigods and the people they're fighting often use magical artifacts to help them on their quests. Basically, they hit everything except number 2, the land itself. Except in the Heroes of Olympus series, where they're literally fighting the magical land itself because the land is gas. So it's got all 4. Once you've determined the source of your magic, you can more easily figure out what it looks like. This is the fun part, and it's probably one of the first things you thought of when you were first coming up with the idea of whatever magical fantasy novel you're writing. Generally speaking, magic falls into 6 major categories, which can and sometimes do overlap. The first is potions. These tend to be the most scientific type of magic, which makes sense because the creation of potions was considered a real science in our world for centuries. It's like chemistry or cooking. You throw a bunch of ingredients in a pot, add the correct amount of heat or cold, and the result can turn you into a bear or give you super strength. It goes without saying that the more technical you get with your potions, the harder your magic system becomes. Whereas if you just have potions as something you can buy at a dollar store without really going into how these potions are made, it remains more on the soft magic system scale. Also, it might be fun to kind of take economic supply and demand in a competitive market into account when you're creating a potion marketplace. I don't think I've ever seen that in a book, and now I kind of want to. Enchantments and curses are another old school type of magic. This is the type of magic that is specifically targeted at a person or a group of people, usually to their detriment. This is really common in fairy tales. Someone insults a witch and they get turned into a toad until they can coerce a young girl into making out with them. These tend to be almost exclusively on the soft side of the magic system scale, largely because the people doing this type of magic are only in the story long enough to do the curse. So their character, backstory, training, abilities, all that remains nebulous and mysterious. Prophecies are, again, old school. People have been trying to see into the future since we got a clear idea of what the future is. Think ancient Greece's oracle. Prophecies in fiction often address major events and world players, usually involving chosen ones and dark lords. They take many different forms: prophetic dreams, talking to ghosts, ancient texts, whatever. This is an author favorite because it's easy to throw in some foreshadowing, which lets us feel smarter than we actually are. Next up, magic items. Magic items started as gifts from gods to mortals. Think Perseus's magic helmet and mirror shield used to kill Medusa. Nowadays, they're pretty much any item with any type of magical prospects. Valyrian steel kills ice zombies. Enchanted jewelry turns people into dicks. Sweaters knitted from enchanted yarn are bulletproof. I've never read a story like that, and again, now I want to. A more modern interpretation to the magical item is making them characters in and of themselves. Token's The One Ring has a character of its own. It has wants and needs. Other magic items are full-on sentient and can even talk, like Jack, the magic sword from the Magnus Chase trilogy. Sometimes magical items can only be wielded by a certain chosen one or type of people. The wands in Harry Potter are just sticks to muggles, but to a witch or wizard they're a valuable tool. They act as conduits to the character's magic. Other items can be used by anyone, which makes them dangerous. The genie's lamp in Aladdin was originally used by the hero, but then the villain got a hold of it and he got access to all that power and made some serious villain headway. Magical creatures are a whole other thing. Every culture has an entire grocery list of weird, crazy, awesome magical creatures. Dragons, genies, sea serpents, phoenixes, unicorns, leprechauns, so much more. And they are constantly evolving. Authors have been doing new spins on dragons for centuries, or they'll just make up totally new creatures. And these magical creatures' role in the story varies. Sometimes they're just props or MacGuffins, like a magical horse that allows the heroes to reach the epic showdown in time. And sometimes they're entire characters in their own right. Sometimes they're the main character. Finally, spells. They're kind of the miscellaneous section of the magic list. It usually involves waving a wand, saying the magic word, or drawing certain shapes on the floor, and then something cool happens that would not ordinarily happen when you graffito the floor. It's generic but also very broad, and typically grants authors the most wiggle room and creative freedom. As you can see, you've got a lot to work with. Literally thousands of years worth of history and mythology from every culture on Earth, and people still come up with totally new, original ideas or unique spins on old concepts every day. Let your imagination run free, and eventually it'll bring something back worthwhile. Alright, now we're going to talk about how magic affects your world, whether it's some medieval style epic fantasy or modern day New York. I can't tell you how to write magic in your world. It's your world, your story. But there are some things you might want to consider, questions you'll want to answer as you're world building. How is magic perceived by the world at large? Is it a secret, or is it just wildly known? If it's a secret, why is it a secret? What would happen if the world found out about magic and magic wielders? How is it a secret? This is a very important question if this takes place in the modern world of cameras and satellite footage. If it's not a secret, if it's widely known, if it's been a part of the world for centuries, now you gotta consider how has it affected this world's history. Who has access to magic? If magic is something you're born with, are these people propelled into leadership, used as soldiers, killed on sight, totally dismissed as a regular thing? What's going on? If magic is something that anybody and everyone can theoretically do, who has access to it? If you have to study magic in order to do it right, who gets to go to school and why? What are some social barriers to someone using magic? If magic requires certain items or resources, how expensive and available are they? Basically, how much social and political power does magic have in your world? What's the power balance between people with magic and people without it? Or the power balance between people who have magic? Are certain spells outlawed or considered taboo? Why? If there are different types of magic, are some more valuable than others? If magic comes from external deities like gods, how do they choose who to give it to? How do people try to convince them to give them magic? What happens to the followers when two or more of these gods get married or go to war? Are religion and government separate or intertwined? Are there different magical cultures or subcultures within the same community? How do they interact with each other? There are hundreds of possibilities here, and that's what makes it so much fun. The best part of magic is that there is limitless potential both in the magic itself and how it's received by your world and characters. That's all for today. Remember to subscribe to the channel and check out my social media links below for more content. 5 subscribers will receive a signed copy of Homestead Hunts in September. If you want early access to my videos, free stories, and more content, check me out on Patreon. Link is in the description. Bye, lovelies!